It was around 2 a.m. when I felt tiny hands poking at my face. I woke up groggy, annoyed, until I realized my 4-year-old son, Jay, was standing there. His cheeks were wet with tears. His little chest was heaving as he sobbed, but this wasn't the kind of crying that comes with pain. No, this was the kind of crying that comes with terror. And then he whispered the words that froze my blood cold. "Dad, the man in the next house is making faces at me." I'm a single father, raising 2 kids in Texas. Alicia, who's 8, and Jay, only 4. Their mom hasn't been around for years. It hasn't been easy, but we managed. We had a good rhythm: school, work, family dinners, bedtime stories. Life was normal, ordinary, safe. At least, that's what I believed. Until that night changed everything. Jay had always been prone to nightmares. Monsters under the bed, shadows in the closet, things I could brush off as imagination. But this was different. He said he saw a man, not a monster. A man in the next house, making scary faces at him through the window. I didn't want to believe it, but there was something about how serious he looked. Something too specific in his words. The next night, my daughter Alicia woke me up. She hadn't done that in years. Her voice trembled as she said, "Dad, the neighbor was making faces at me too." She told me she peeked through the curtain after hearing a strange noise. And what she described made my stomach twist. She said the man smiled, his teeth bared in a way that didn't look right. His eyes fixed on her. And then, he made a motion across his arms, like he was cutting himself. And then, he beckoned her to come closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. That Friday night, I let both kids sleep in my room while I camped out in theirs. I sat by the window, phone in hand, pretending to watch a show, but my ears strained for every sound. Around midnight, I heard it. Clicking sounds. Rhythmic. Human. Like someone calling for a horse. My stomach dropped. The sound turned into a high-pitched whistling, like someone sucking in through their teeth. And then, I pulled the curtain back. There he was. That face. That horrible grin. And his arms, slashing violently against each other in a sick pantomime of self-harm. When he realized it wasn't a child staring back at him but another adult, his grin fell. Rage took its place. He slammed his own window shut. I thought it was over. I thought maybe I had scared him off. But then, bang. A thunderous smack rattled the glass of my kid's window. My heart leapt. I pulled the curtain back again, and there it was, a handprint. High. Too high. The window was already tall, built on a raised foundation. To leave a handprint there, the man would have had to leap into the air with unnatural strength. I moved to my bedroom, whispering reassurances to Alicia and Jay as they hid inside their little tent. That's when I saw it again. Through the moonlight, a shadow, a figure. At first, it looked normal. A man standing at the window. But then he raised his arms into a Y shape. And his arms, God, his arms were far too long, twice the length of his body. His hands, with 5 fingers each, dangled and twitched as if they had minds of their own. He pounded the glass with those impossible limbs, each thud rattling my bones. Just when I thought the window would shatter, sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flooded the street. The figure slammed its hands against the glass one final time. And then, as impossible as it sounds, its arms seemed to shear off, disappearing before hitting the ground. And the figure ran. The police entered my neighbor's house. Minutes later, they came out pale, disturbed, and silent. When I asked what they had found, The female officer looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Your neighbor is dead." Since that night, my kids and I haven't returned home. We're staying with family, but the memory of those nights won't leave us. The house is tainted. The neighborhood is tainted. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, when the world is asleep, I still see it in my mind. That silhouette. That grin. Those arms reaching toward my window. And I wonder, if my neighbor was already dead, then what the hell was watching my children? Story number 2. Have you ever trusted a stranger, only to realize they were the danger all along? This story isn't a movie. It happened to me, and I'm still not sure I survived it completely. I've always believed I was careful. Too careful, some might say. I don't stand close to traffic lights. I share my location with my mom and my sister everywhere I go. I lock my car doors the second I get in. Little rituals that made me feel untouchable. Safe. But safety is an illusion. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and it all unravels. It was a little past midnight. I had covered a friend's evening shift and was bone tired. On my way home, I stopped by my favorite grocery store. The place was in a quiet, suburban part of town. Not dangerous. At least, not in the daylight. The moment I left with my food, the cashier locked the doors behind me. The store went dark. Completely dark. No glowing signs. No humming lights. Just my footsteps echoing across the empty lot. I remember thinking, I should hurry, but I didn't. Instead of leaving, I slid into my car, unwrapped my food, and pressed play on my phone. The Terror, Episode 5. The glow of the screen lit up my small car. It felt almost cozy, like a safe little bubble in a deserted world. I thought, what harm could a few minutes do? That's when I heard the shout. A woman was suddenly in front of my car, waving both arms. I hadn't seen her approach. It was like she had stepped out of the shadows themselves. She moved to my window and gestured down. Roll it down. I didn't move. Something in me, something primal, screamed, don't. My hand tightened on the lock, even though it was already secured. And then she yelled words that made my blood run cold. Hey, there's someone in your back seat. Time slowed. I could almost feel cold metal against my throat. The classic horror scene, the killer waiting in the dark, crouched low. I unbuckled my seatbelt. My hand gripped the handle, ready to run. But first, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. I turned, checking every inch of the cabin. My car was empty, and in that instant, I understood. She was lying. Click. The sound of my door handle. She was pulling at it. I lifted my eyes, and that's when I saw her face under the streetlight. Her skin was stretched too tightly, like it barely fit her bones. Her mouth was thin, unnatural, carved onto her skull. And her teeth, too many, too small, jumbled together like a broken piano. She grinned at me. That grin wasn't human. I slammed my car into reverse. The tires screamed across the asphalt. And still, she held on. Running alongside me, her face inches from my window, smiling, always smiling. For a moment, I thought she would never let go. But finally, her hand slipped from the handle. I tore out of the parking lot like the devil was on my heels. And maybe she was. By the time I got home, my heart still hadn't slowed. I locked the doors, the windows, double-checked, triple-checked, but her face lingered in my mind, in the corners of my vision, in the silence of my empty house. I told myself I was safe. But safety is an illusion. Eventually, I collapsed into sleep. And that's when the nightmare began. Bang, bang, bang. I shot awake to violent pounding on my front door. The clock read 4:17. I froze in bed. Who knocks like that, at that hour, unless it's life or death? Then, a voice, calling my name. "It's Brian," the voice said. Brian, my neighbor across the street. Relief washed over me. But his words, "Do you have someone over right now? Because I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't look quite right." My blood went cold. I hesitated, then asked, "Brian, are you okay?" He cleared his throat. And when he spoke again, his voice sounded different. Too careful. Too forced. "Oh yeah, just a cold. Nothing serious. But I still wanted to check in on you." That's when it hit me. Brian's dog. I had seen him walking her countless times. And she was a girl. My voice cracked. "Brian, isn't your dog a she?" Silence. And then, the handle began to turn. Slow. Testing the lock. My breath caught in my throat. The metal shook as someone pulled at it, harder and harder. Then, bang. A body slammed against the door with full force. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Finally, silence. I forced myself to creep to the blinds, shaking, and peek outside. There, a figure, walking slowly down the street. Not rushing, not hiding, and even from behind, I knew it was her. The rest of the night stretched like a lifetime. Every creak in the house felt like her footsteps. Every shadow looked like her face. Maybe it was all a nightmare. Maybe she followed me home. Maybe she'll come back. All I know is this. The next time a stranger warns you of danger, don't trust them. Because sometimes, they are the danger. Story number 3. I almost missed it altogether, buried as it was under all the junk mail and pre-approved credit card offers. The announcement was printed on a 7-inch by 5-inch piece of white cardstock. The right side featured a photo of a couple, while the left bore a simple message in a plain font. Just married. David and Emma. June 6th, Acadia. I read that strangely unceremonious message twice as I stood in front of my mailbox, trying to recall how I knew the couple. The only David I knew was my brother, who was not only single, but perhaps the most single man I've ever known. I looked over to the photo of the happy couple, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that my jaw dropped. The man in the picture was in fact my younger brother. He was strolling down the beach, hand in hand with a young woman, both of them caught mid-laugh. He gazed adoringly at the woman, at Emma, I guess, who was covering the top half of her face with her free hand. I thought it was strange that she'd be obscuring her own eyes in a wedding announcement photo, but the card itself was so strange that I didn't dwell on her pose. The announcement was either a prank, which would have been remarkably out of character for my humorless sibling, or David had subverted my every expectation and eloped. Once I got past the initial shock of the card, I went back inside, tossed the junk mail, and gave David a call. It was evening where he was, but not so late that he would have been asleep. He picked up after 6 rings. "Well, mazel fucking tov," I told him, squinting down at the woman's face. "Ha! Who's the lucky gal?" He paused, clearly trying to puzzle out my question, then, "What the hell are you talking about, man?" Okay, so it was a prank. If he had secretly gotten married and wanted to hide it from his family, then he wouldn't have mailed me an announcement. From the confusion in his voice, I figured he wasn't in on the joke. It sounded like one of his friends pulled one over on him. I explained the situation, then sent him a photo of the card. Instead of laughing it off like I expected, David got so quiet I thought the call had dropped. He eventually said he had no idea who Emma was, nor who had sent me the card. Sure, some of his friends were pranksters, but how would any of them have gotten my address without David's knowledge? He said he'd ask his friends about it, and requested that I see who else had received the wedding announcements. Up until that point, I'd still thought of the card as a harmless joke, but the severity of David's reaction put me on edge. Maybe there actually was some woman in his life that, for whatever reason, he didn't want people knowing about. After the call, I texted my parents and a few of our family friends. One of my old neighbors had indeed received a card, and seemed a little disappointed when I revealed it was only a prank. My parents checked their mailbox upon my request, and only then did they find the announcement. Thank God I called before they could discover it on their own. I genuinely think my mom would have had a heart attack. So far, those are the only 2 households that have received the cards, and I found it bizarre that David's friends knew either of those addresses. Before I fell asleep, I texted David my update. He said that he hadn't yet found the culprit and planned to continue his search in the morning. Again, I was somewhat perturbed by his seriousness. Was I missing something? I spent the next few hours trying to figure out who his bride could have been. In doing so, I quickly started to feel like every other woman on earth was named Emma. There were so many significant women in mine and David's lives who bore that name that sorting through them all seemed pointless. There was, for example, our childhood friend and neighbor, who David harbored an unrequited crush on for years until her family moved away. There had been a tragic incident at our high school in which an Emma in David's year fell headfirst behind some lockers, dying from positional asphyxia. I had dragged David along to a rager at an Emma's house in college, which had ended in both of us spending a night in jail for public intoxication. Apparently, my life was just one big stream of Emmas, and none of them seemed plausibly linked to the marriage announcements. Now, here's the part of all this that I'm still struggling to make sense of. The night after I called David about the card, I woke up in the middle of the night to my phone ringing. I checked the caller ID and saw that it was David. I assumed he was calling me about the stupid prank, and part of me wanted to ignore him until the morning. Then again, he could have been having some kind of emergency, so I picked up the phone and grumbled, "What?" into the mic. There was silence for a few seconds, and then I was shocked to hear a woman's voice on the other end. "Hello," said the voice, quiet and slow and unmistakably feminine. I sat up in bed. What? David? Who is this? I double-checked the screen and confirmed it was in fact David's number. Another long pause, and then, "Yes, this is David's apartment." After that, the caller hung up. Disturbed, I called David back immediately, but no one picked up. I sent him a text asking who had just called, then called him 3 more times. No one picked up, and I was starting to panic. Yeah, I know the most likely explanation was that he simply had a woman over, but something didn't feel right. I guess David's paranoia was rubbing off on me because I was so weirded out that I actually phoned David's buddy Mike, who lived in his same apartment building, and made him do a wellness check for me. When Mike got to the apartment, my brother was asleep inside, perfectly safe and sound. He didn't have anyone over, and there were no signs that anyone had broken into his apartment or messed with his phone. And yet, I hadn't imagined the call, at least not entirely. According to the phone logs, there had definitely been an outbound call from David's phone to mine. He had no memory of calling, and even if David had a history of sleep talking, which he doesn't, the voice certainly didn't sound like a man impersonating a woman. I'm at a complete loss. I tried giving the card a more thorough look this morning, trying to see if I'd glossed over some clue. The longer I stared at the woman in the photo, the more creeped freaked out I got. Why was she covering her eyes? If someone had gone through the trouble of creating fake couple photos, why not give Emma a more natural pose? Frankly, I could only look at the marriage announcement for a few seconds at a time before I had to put it down. Maybe that's why it took me so long to realize that the woman's mouth had been flipped upside down.